Let's go and look at some things here today that I think would be a blessing. It's been a blessing to me that the Father wants to give us. I was just looking at my life and I noticed that every 5 years, there is a major transition and shift because 3 years, a tree is unfruitful. The fourth year is an offering to the Lord, and the fifth year is the year of increase. So we know that the fifth year in the cycle, not necessarily 5 years, but there's a cycle. And when you understand those cycles, you can work with God. You can find yourself knowing that there will be an end. The difference in the stronghold is it never comes to an end. When you're truly being processed by God, there it makes sense. You see grace accompanied with process. You see ability. You don't see complete devastation. You can see and you can sense and you know why you're in the season you're in because you know what the last season was. So seasons don't just jump around. They're succinctly ordered by the Lord. And I talk a lot about grace because it has been nothing but the grace of God. And those of you that can relate to grace and how it works. And I want to just share four things with you. Like I said, it'll be a 5-minute teaching. I want you to write this down if you got a pencil and paper. Grace aids to the death of yourself. Grace will assist to the death because of your own. You don't want to die to yourself. You like yourself. You feel like you're okay. And as a matter of fact, you find yourself competing with yourself and sometimes competing with others. But the Apostle Paul wrote, I believe it's in Romans, and I'm going to paraphrase, it's the 6th chapter. He talked about the death of Christ died, and he died to sin once for everyone. But your death, let me start over with this. For the death of Christ, he died. He died to sin once for everyone. But the life he lives, he lived to God. In other words, Isaiah wrote it pleased the Father to bruise him. So Jesus is establishing a principle here that his death was to satisfy a need for the Father. Your death is to satisfy a need for someone else. Everything that God processes you through is because somebody else was processed before you for you to get to where you are. It's succession. It's transgenerational blessing. So your death and everything that you go through is not about you. And if you can see the future generation, you can see the Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Levi, if you can see the future, that what you're going through is to leave a legacy, then you can see how grace aids you to your death. Because the only way there can be a prophetic exchange is that there's a death. God works through death. And when I say death, death to your own ambitions, death to your life, God can't use you with all your ideas. He has to put you on the potter's wheel. He has to put you in a place where he can literally know that there's none of you and all of him. So the first thing is grace aids to the death. Grace, again, is the ability of God for you to operate as if God himself was doing it. So what he does it through a death vessel. I reckon you dead. I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. Yet not I live. The second thing is grace is God in your place of vulnerability. Now, these words really push back on the flesh. In Romans 6, I'm going to paraphrase. Christ died bound to you, that you belong to him, and raised you for God by grace. So when he demonstrated, as we're getting into the resurrection season, as he demonstrated, he bound himself up with you, and you were the tree, which represents humanity. And when he died, he reclaimed again ownership through the blood that he shed and through the life that he gave. So number two, grace is God's vehicle for your vulnerability, because God doesn't want you covered up. He wants you naked and transparent so that there can be an exchange, so that he can get into the very core of your spirit, beyond your solical realm, as I talk about so often. The third thing, grace is the fountain of God's favor. Abraham obeyed God and it was credited. This is in Genesis and we see it recorded in the New Testament, the 15th chapter, 6th verse. He was considered it righteousness. Righteousness we know is favor, because in Deuteronomy 28 he said, if you would hearken to the voice of my Lord thy God, blessed shall thou be, and favor shall come upon me, and all of this. Favor. So grace, the ability of God that he puts in you, the enablement, the place that God hollows out so that you can hear God and so that you can know God, is the place of favor. Now we know favor is not fair if we measure it, but favor it becomes the fountain. Grace becomes the fountain that God flows favor. It's amazing. On yesterday, I picked up the phone. I needed to get a doctor for a specific thing. I go through the internet. I get on there and I put in what I needed and I call this number. And this doctor answers the phone in the morning. And I said, I need to see you because there's some medication that I'm taking is causing a reaction for my knees, because I have things with my knees. And he's a specialist and it's causing my blood pressure to go up, and it shouldn't be going up. And immediately after I said that, he says, well, what office can you come to? And I was shocked, first of all, that the doctor answered the phone. We have an office in Sandy Springs. We have an office in another. Which one do you want to come? He said, what time do you want to come? I said, what time do I want to come? Well, whatever time you come, I'll meet you at that office. I said, oh boy, I could have asked him to come to my house. So I get on the phone and I'm asking this guy. I'm shocked, first of all. He says, I'm going to download the paperwork so you fill it out. And I said, well, I'll be in Decatur area and I'll meet you. Okay, I'll be there. What time? I said, 3 o'clock. He said, I don't know if I can make it there that quick because I got other patients to see. 4 o'clock? No. 5 o'clock. Let's meet. Okay, I'll be there at 5 o'clock. I get there at 5 o'clock. He unlocks the door. He goes into this office suite. And it was one of the most incredible experiences. And I looked at my husband and we enjoyed. He was an 80-year-old doctor who specialized in what I needed, got things straightened up, and let me know that the medication I was taking for my knees was counteracting the medication I take for blood pressure. And we just sat there for an hour with a doctor, because he said, I don't do it for pay. I do it because I love it. Now, to me, that was favor, because I wanted immediately to get this thing under control. And of course, what he said and what he did, it opened up a whole new relationship. He found out he was the top, the best, articles. I mean, he had so many certificates. You would think that God would set me in a place within an hour like that. So when we talk about the fountain of favor, you can depict things like that, where you walk in, and I've had walked in. I've not asked for discounted rent. I've not asked for cuts, and it was so low that it's embarrassing to even share. So grace, how does favor come? It comes to the degree that we allow God to operate through us as if it's him. We comes to the place where, if we're on the potter's wheel, that we will yield ourselves so that he can make us into another man. The fourth thing, grace gives birth to prophetic destiny. And I've always told you, and I've said before, that God gives you what I call it, eternal scrolls that were written about you, that goes so far back that whether you were dropped, whether you came out of wedlock, whether your mom rejected, your dad was an alcoholic, God has a history of you so far back that what has happened to you in these last years of your life is void and null. It does not define you. Your identity is the express image of his person. And in 1 Timothy 1 and 8, it says, based on the prophetic words spoken about you earlier. Paul said, wage a warfare concerning the prophecy earlier. What do you mean earlier? He's not talking about in your teen years. He's talking about in the eternal scrolls that were written about you. You need to wage a warfare before your dad left your mom and you went through a terrible divorce, and before you were assaulted, before you were molested, before you were scarred. He said, wage a warfare concerning the things about you earlier. And what happens is we get stuck in the recent and we forget that God wrote a book about you. And there's a destiny that is set before you. So let's go over this again. Grace aids to the death of yourself. Grace is a succession or the place of vulnerability. Grace is the fountain of God's favor. And grace gives to your prophetic destiny life. And so I hope that this has been a blessing to you. I just want you to know how loved you are and how important you are to God and how he would have died if it had just been you. And once you understand that, you can pursue some of the greatest things you've ever done. God bless.